simple statistics. I hope all of you are able to see the screen that I'm sharing right now.
Yes, ma'am. The screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
So statistics. First of all, what is statistics? This is actually the practice practice or science of collecting and analyzing numerical data in large quantities, especially for the purpose of inferring proportions in whole form from those represented in a representative sample. What does it mean? It simply means that we need to uh, there is a population out of which we take out a sample that represents that population, and then we kind of collect and analyze the numerical data which we obtain from kind of inferring a lot of proportions. Now comes, this is basic statistics that deals with only numerical values, numbers. Now what is biostatistics? Biostatistics means when we apply this art of collecting, analyzing large quantities of data in the biology. Application of statistics to a wide range of topics in biology, that is called biostatistics. It is basically the science which deals with development of application of the most appropriate methods. It includes collection of data, presentation of the collected data, analysis and interpretation of the results, making decisions on the basis of such analysis. While we are dealing in today's session, our main aim or focus would be on collection of data and presentation of data, and analysis, interpretation would be taken care in the coming up session. So we would be more focusing on collection and presentation of the collected data. Now, what is the role of statisticians? To guide the design of an experiment or survey prior to data collection. See, it is very important that before we start collecting the data, we must know what research design are we going to follow. Are we going to follow an experimental design, survey design, whatever research design, but we need to choose it beforehand, and we need to make a kind of proper framework through which we are going to collect the data, or we need to analyze the data. Then to analyze data using proper statistical procedures and techniques. It is very important that the techniques that we choose to analyze the collected data is accurate, specific to that particular set of collected data. Otherwise, we will get fake results. We will get misguided. To present and interpret the results to researchers and other decision makers. Whatever statistical information that we get while doing the analysis of data, then we need to interpret the data. That what does this data what does data infer basically? So that we need to understand. Now, what is research data? Research data is any information that has been collected, observed, generated, or created to original research findings, to validate original research findings. Data are individual pieces of factual information recorded and used for the purpose of analysis. It is raw information from which statistics are created. Statistics are the result of data analysis, its interpretation and presentation. Often, these types of statistics are referred to as statistical data. See, if you see this slide, I have mentioned a lot of terms: data, research data, and statistical data. Data is simply the collection of factual information. Unless and until it is converted through data analysis, it is interpreted, it is presented properly, it does not become statistical data. Statistical data means the data that we know can interpret something. Only collection of data doesn't mean anything. So what are the seven main characteristics of statistics? It consists of aggregate of the facts. It is affected by many causes. It should be numerically expressed. It is very important. Unless the data is numerically expressed, we cannot measure it, and it will become actually waste. It must be enumerated or estimated accurately. Sorry. It should be collected for a predetermined purpose in a systematic manner. This means that we must know that what is the purpose behind collection of data. Like nowadays we are having corona pandemic, so we must know that what is the purpose. We want to see the mortality rate, we want to see the recovery rate. So accordingly we need to determine the data. It should be capable of being placed in relation to each other. Then there are 5 stages of statistical investigations. First, collection of data, organization of data, presentation of data, analysis of data, and interpretation. So now we come to collection of data. See, data collection technique is a technique that allows researchers to systematically collect information about the study population and the settings in which they occur. There are many different ways to collect data, and the approach depends upon a lot of things. First of all, the study objective, that what is the objective of our study, why we need to collect data, then the study design that we are going to follow, then the availability of time, money, and personnel. It also depends upon whether the study is intended to produce relatively precise quantitative findings or to produce qualitative descriptive findings. Sometimes the data collected is also qualitative. So data collection would depend, the technique would depend on these factors. There can be different sources of data. We can collect the data from certain records, like we can find some data from hospital records, from government records, from WHO records, from any kind of surveys, like Abhi we shared one of the survey. So that is also a means of collecting data. Or we are kind of doing some experiment, some interventional study. So these are different sources from where the data can be collected. Now, types of data. Usually the data are discussed in terms of variables, where a variable is any characteristic that varies from one member of a population to another. A simple example is height in centimeter. Weight, it varies from person to person. Now, what are the types of variables? There are 2 basic types of variables. One is numerical variable and another is categorical variable. Numerical, as the word defines, is a quantitative value where a number is assigned. Categorical, that is not quantitative in nature. It is defined by classes or categories into which an individual member falls. Suppose we take a survey and see how many males are there and females are there, then this is a categorical variable. Then what are types of numerical variables? Discrete and continuous. Discrete means when there is no decimal, like 1, 2, and 3. There is no decimal. It is just a number obtained by counting, is called a discrete numerical variable. Continuous. Continuous means there is no gap. There is decimal. It is basically more precise way. It is further divided into various types, like one is your ratio scale, another is your interval scale. Ratio scale, where order and distance is implied, the differences can be compared and it has a true zero. Ratios can be compared like height, weight, blood pressure. Interval scale, basic difference between ratio and interval is in ratios we have true zero, but in interval scale we do not have any true zero. For example, temperature. Temperature can be -10, -5, +10, +5, whatever, right? But height cannot be in minus. So there has to be a zero, absolute zero, a true zero. But interval scale, that is not the case. Okay. Then categorical variables, they are defined by the classes or categories into which an individual member falls. Like nominal scale, name only, like gender, hair color, ethnicity. Ordinal scale means implied in an order, like low, medium, high. For example, Likert scale. Likert scale is a 5-point scale where we are using, you can see here, very satisfied, low, sorry, I'm sorry, this was low satisfied or no satisfaction. No satisfaction, sorry, it is right, I'm sorry again. It is very satisfied to very dissatisfied. So there is a scale from 1 to 5. Like compared to traditional classroom teaching, what is your satisfaction rating of the e-learning? So on the scale of 1 to 5, we are deciding very satisfied to very dissatisfied. This is the most commonest used scale, that is called the Likert scale. Then statistical data collection. Depending upon the classification, depending upon the source, there are two kinds of data, primary data and secondary data. Primary data means that you are yourself collecting the data by doing experiments or whatever, but you are the one who's collecting the data for the first time and you are going to use that data, that is called primary data. And secondary data means that you are getting from some already published source, unpublished source, and that is called the secondary data. Now, what are the major techniques for collecting primary data? Primary data can be collected through questionnaires, interviews, observations, information from correspondence, schedules sent to enumerators. Like we have just shared a survey questionnaire with you, that is also a kind of technique to collect the primary data. Each method has its own advantages and disadvantages. No one single method is absolute foolproof method. For example, like questionnaire and surveys are open to self-report biases. What does that mean? That means suppose I am doing a survey and there might be that you want to give a socially desirable answer rather than an honest opinion. For example, if I ask you how many of you are well aware or you know something about statistics, maybe you do not want to write no. Even if you don't know, then also you won't write no, because that would be seen by all the people in the chat box. So you might give a socially desirable answer. Then observational methods are always susceptible to the observer's bias. If I am the observer, maybe I am biased towards somebody. So I may observe the thing which I want to observe and not the actual thing which should be observed. So these different data gathering methods could have some or the other problem. That is why we prefer to use more than one methodology. Biases, so that we are able to remove the biases from the data. Data from the different methods can be compared, and if consistent, it is likely that the variables are being validly measured. Like, we check data is collected and we check the reliability and validity of that data. Then this table shows the techniques of collecting data, quantitative data and the qualitative data. Quantitative data, that means the number. You can collect through structured interview, statistical measures, self-administered questionnaires, or some secondary data sources. And qualitative data can be collected from in-depth interview, focused group discussions, or direct observation of the operations. Demographics, information about the people you are gathering data from. Demographics, like we also study in our physiotherapy as well, that we take demographic data. So some examples like age, gender, income, ethnic background, status. But that data should be, the demographic data collected should be very specific for the purpose for which the data is being collected. We should not collect the data which is not required to be collected. Now let us come to the questionnaire methodology. Questionnaires are one of the most efficient ways to collect data. They contain usually fixed response questions about various features of an organization. They are usually online or paper and pencil measures that are used, and they can be administered to a large number of people simultaneously. Like I can distribute the questionnaires online as well as physical mode at the same time. It can be given to a lot of people. It can be analyzed quickly. The feedback is received very easily. The questionnaires can be standard based on common research, or they can be customized to meet the specific data gathering need. Then in designing the questionnaire, there are several points that we need to remember. The language should be very clear, understandable by the respondents. If the questionnaire is in English, then the person must understand English. If the person doesn't understand English, then the questionnaire is of no use for that person. You need to convert to the local language. Then always start with the easier questions and move on to the questions which are difficult or they are more sensitive to answer. Try to avoid embarrassing or painful questions, because otherwise the person might not answer the question. Avoid asking more than one item of information in one single question. One question, one piece of information. Do not overload the questionnaire with items that are not essential for your study. Keep it as short as possible. If you give 4 pages of questionnaire to somebody, half of the motivation is lost. So it should always be concise, clear, and to the point. Avoid biased questions. Never give cues of the answer, like diarrhea leads to dehydration.
Dr.
Isn't
Nidhi, you
it?
have muted your mic, I think, by mistake.
My mic is working. Anybody else is also not able to hear, or just you?
No, ma'am, you are audible.
But
We are able to hear you.
Okay, thank you. There might be some connection problem at your end, Dr. Charu. Okay, avoid, don't give the cues to the person. Ask all respondents each question in exactly the same way so that the answer also comes in the same way. Pre-test the questionnaire in an actual field situation. It is very important. We should pre-test the questionnaire. If we are customizing the questionnaire, we must always pre-test this. Just simply do not apply the questionnaire. It may not be that valid or reliable tool. Then usually in the questionnaire design, we have 2 kinds of questions, open-ended and closed-ended. Open-ended, in which usually you can give the answers. Closed-ended, where you have the options already given and you need to choose from them. Now there are certain kind of drawbacks which are attached with the questionnaire method. First, the responses are always limited to the question asked in the instrument. You cannot add additional things to it. Additional data cannot be added, or even you cannot ask for any clarification because there's nobody to answer for those clarifications. They tend to be impersonal because there's no personal touch. I have given you the questionnaire, fill it up and give it back. Okay? And usually people answer it in a socially acceptable manner. Another method, that is your interview method. Interview method, that means I'm talking to you in person. So there is a personalized approach usually, and it is one of the most widely used technique for collecting data. There is an opportunity to ask the respondent direct questions. You can always seek for clarification if you have any doubt regarding any question. There is always a flexibility, and even the interviewer can go in depth asking questions one after the other. Okay, you can start from general questions and then those questions only lead the way for another question. But they should always be structured. They are usually conducted one-to-one, but there can be focused group discussions also. Group interviews usually save time and allow people to build on others' responses. But group interviews may inhibit respondents' answers if trust is an issue. So we have to be very careful that we need to discuss this thing in a group interview or in a one-to-one interview. The member of the research team asks the questions verbally and records the respondent's answer. Now, what is the importance of the interviewers? Achieve a completion rate of at least 80 to 85%. The presence of an interviewer generally decreases the number of negative answers, or if you don't know or no kind of answer, you usually tend to give the answer. The interviewer can also provide a guard against the confusing questionnaire items. They can clarify the doubts, so you can always answer all the queries. But again, with the interview, there are some rules attached. Very important that you need to be neutral. You should not give answers. You should not put words in the interviewee's mouth. They should treat all the respondents similar. There should be no bias. There should be good interpersonal skills, acceptable, friendly. The person should be sitting relaxed. The respondent should also feel relaxed. Then you must enjoy talking to that person so that the person is also feeling very calm and relaxed. The interviewer should be familiar with the questionnaire. He should, kind of first do a simulatory session, understand, and there should be kind of no stumbling over words or phrases. He should always follow a structured approach, one question leading another question, and the question should not be asked in a haphazard manner. All the answers, all the responses should be recorded properly. The interviewer should isolate the respondent during the interview if even others are present so that the answers are not influenced. Like we usually do in, while we take the vivas, we tend to separate the kids so that they don't tell the questions to the fellow students. Just similarly like that. Then focus group. Focus group discussion is a kind where, you tend to take less amount of time, and you can always go for in-depth information. You can always achieve more qualitative information from the large number of respondents. There are usually 10 to 15 people sitting together and then discussing over a topic. Certain questions are there, and then they are discussing and giving answers, and their responses can get influenced with the other respondent answers also. So it, in a way, it is a kind of unstructured group meeting. But again, the richness and the variety of the information would depend upon the extent of the trust. Now, what is the drawback of the interview? Most important drawback is it takes a lot of time, because if you're conducting individual interviews and you have a great deal of sample size, and taking interviews, spending 1 hour with each person will take a lot of time. So it is very time consuming. It has a chance of lot of personal biases, which can always distort the data. The nature of the question and the interactions between the interviewer and the respondent may discourage or encourage certain kind of responses. Then it also requires a great deal of skill at the end of the interviewer so that he or she collects valid data. There can be various questions in the interview, like how, suppose we are talking about an organization, so how do teaching and non-teaching employees interact in the office? How do you know when you have done an excellent job? How do non-teaching employees learn about organizational change? If you could change 1 or 2 things about the way teaching and non-teaching person interact, what do you think those would be? So these are kind of certain questions that can be asked. Next method is the observation method. Observe. We collect the data by observing. Then observing can be in different ways. In the function settings, it can be in different ways. Like either I can be part of that group, and within that group, I can observe the fellow mates, or I can be a person sitting outside and then observing the certain specific kinds of behavior. So it can be a participatory observation, sorry, or it can be a third party observation. Now, what are the advantages? They are free of the biases inherent in the self-report data. Sorry again. They put the practitioner directly in touch with the behaviors in question. They involve real-time data describing behavior occurring in a present rather than the past. They are adapting in that they can be modified depending on what is being observed. Problems. Interpretations can be difficult. Observers must decide which people to observe, when to observe, in what events they should be observed. Failure to attend these sampling issues can result in a lot of bias. So we must be very, very careful. Now, observation protocol. A decision needs to be made on what to observe. For example, if I know that I need to see that how people in my organization are they working in collaboration with each other or not, whether the teaching staff is being very cordial with the non-teaching staff. So I need to observe, I must know what I need to observe. Accordingly, I would choose the sample size, I will choose the time, maybe I can choose their lunch timings to see how much they are collaborating, how much they are talking, how much they are communicating with each other, not at the time of classes, because then everybody is in their respective classes, and then we cannot judge how they are interacting or communicating. Okay, so it is very important in what kind of settings are we observing the people. Now, what are data sets and data tables? Data set, data for a group of variables for a collection of persons. What is data table? When the data, we organize it into a table. That means it has a column, it has a row. That is called data, a table. So this was about the collection of data. We studied a lot of methodologies like questionnaires method, like survey methods, observation methods. So primary data and secondary data collection. So this was about collection of data. Now we come to methods of presentation of data. We have already collected the data. Now we must know how to present the data so that it becomes a statistical data. We have collected quantitative, qualitative information, but now we need to present it properly. There are different methods to present. First is numerical presentation, second is your graphical representation, and third is your mathematical presentation. Tables and graphs. Why do we need them? We need them to display the data that can be readily understood. Tables and graphs should contain enough information that we need not to go back to the text to understand that table. The table should be self-explanatory. They should share certain common features and they should be suitable. There are certain things that we need to take care while we are designing these things. First of all, title and source. Title means the title of the table should define what the table is about, how it has been classified, where and when. Every cell or every point that are plotted on the graph should be self-explanatory. Usually what we do is, while we make or prepare a table, we tend to state the purpose of the table or graph, which shouldn't be done. It is the most commonest mistake that instead of writing the title properly, we tend to state the purpose of the table. No. Then we must always mention the source. If you are taking that particular information, that table from anywhere, any published source, then you must always mention the source statement. Otherwise, it is copyright infringement. So we must always mention source from where we are taking that data. And believe me, it is the most commonest mistake that I have seen in a lot of Indian journals. So graphs and tables should stand alone in a report. This means that readers should not have to refer to the text in order to understand or interpret. The table should be very descriptive, clear, with meaningful labels. I'm giving you here an example of how to write a title. Like what, how, where, and when. So number and percent of current smokers for North Delhi district by ethnicity, gender, and age. Smoking assessment survey 2020, 2019, whatever. So I have here mentioned everything. What is it about? How it has been classified? Where we have taken and when. When means the timing. So this is the way a good title is framed for a table. And see here, uninformative title when we have not mentioned all these things. We have just mentioned current smokers for North Delhi district, smoking assessment survey. We haven't mentioned when it was done, how it was classified, nothing. So that is an uninformative title. So numerical presentation, that is the tabular presentation. So tables basically means when we represent the data in a numerical way. Tabular representation can be a simple or a complex. So if we see here a simple frequency distribution table, you can see you have to here mention the title, name of the variable, you're taking what categories, frequency, percentage, total, everything we need to mention. For example, if we are doing distribution of 50 patients at the surgical department of a hospital according to their ABO blood groups. So we have mentioned the blood groups here, frequency here, percentage here, and a total here. And this is the title of the table. So we have to mention all these things properly. This is according to their age. So accordingly, the table has been prepared. Now this is a complex frequency distribution table. Complex means in one table when we are giving not just one information, but there are too many pieces of information in just one table, making it looking more complex. Like here we are taking lung cancer patients. One is cases, another is the control group, smoker, non-smoker. We are finding total number, percentages. So it is a kind of complex table. This is also a complex table. I have here tried to mention, see here I have mentioned the source, American Journal of Public Health. I have taken here checklist for preparing tables. Usually the journals that we want to get our article published have a checklist. So this is one of the examples that have been taken. Each table stands alone. Readers need not to refer to the text for understanding. The titles fully explain the data displayed. Comprehensive, they should be comprehensive. brief and clear with minimum of statistical abbreviations, appropriate tables, measures of uncertainty along with point estimates. That means if you are mentioning the mean, you must mention the standard deviation. The universal abbreviations are used and spelled out. Sample size should be presented at the top of the table. Percentages can be there. Confidence intervals should be provided. Redundancy is eliminated between text and tables. Okay, so this is a kind of checklist. Only results essential to the main thesis are presented, and we are not kind of giving undue data. Once a paper is accepted, once the paper is accepted and you are taking any table from that particular paper, then you always must write to the publisher for grant of using that specific table, or if it applies to figures as well. If you are taking any figure from anywhere, from any journal, from any published source, you need to take the publisher's grant. Okay, otherwise that will be infringement of the copyright. This is a kind of table format that I have shown you here. See here, I have mentioned the title. Then this is the rows and columns in which I have defined. And here you can see in the bottom, like what is this A, I have mentioned here. What is this B, it has been mentioned. So this table becomes self-explanatory in itself. So this is very important, how we present data. This is also one of the data presented in a tabular form. Now, next presentation methodology is your graphical presentation. Graphs versus tables. Graphs are always simple, clear, easily remembered. Why? Because they have a visual appeal. Usually we give a lot of colors to it. So it is always visually appealing. Picture of complex relationships can be shown, emphasized nicely. It is one of the popular methods. Disadvantage? If not drawn properly, of course, it may lack precision, flexibility, or it can provide for distortion, means there can be some misleading data also. The way we want to present, we present in that way, that means we are misleading. Now, while we are making graphs, we make graphs according to different axes of reference: rectangular, circular, and geographical. Rectangular means Cartesian, the graph paper that we draw. Circular, angular, the way we draw the pie charts. Geographical means the geographical charts. Nowadays, we see a lot of geographical charts, especially on the corona, that corona cases are here. There's these many cases here in America, Europe, India, whatever. Those are called your geographical maps. There are different type of graphs: pie chart, component band chart, bar chart, spot map, rate map, arithmetic scale line graph, logarithm scale line graph, histogram, and frequency polygon. This is a circular pie chart. You can see here. See, I am again showing you, I have mentioned the source from I have taken this. So it is very important that you mention the source always while you use it. So you can see here, I am showing the US population by race or ethnicity in the year 2000. And this is total 100. So how many whites are there, Native Americans, Asians? This is the pie chart. Frame of reference, circle of 360 degrees. Show how a whole circle is divided into parts, starts at 12 o'clock and includes segments in descending order of magnitude. State what, how classified, where, when in the reference to slices. Reference for data published elsewhere, the source should always be mentioned. Using two or more pie charts side by side to depict the relative magnitude of the parts of two or more entities generally does not work well. The component band chart is much better geographical device for the situation. What does it mean? It means that if we want to compare two things, and instead of using the pie charts, if showing the magnitude of the parts of two or more entities, and instead of using the pie chart, you can always use the component band chart. We'll come to it later. This is also a kind of pie chart, like time spent on daily activities. This is the arbitrary thing. Just shown here to show you. Then what is component band chart? It is kind of a bar chart, ideal for comparing two or more sets of percentages. Pie chart is generally better for one set of percentages, but if you want to show two or more, then we use component band chart. This is the component band chart. Like here we are showing male and female. So blue here shows male percentage and red here shows the female. So these are two components. So you can, this is better in which can be seen in component band bar chart and not via pie chart. If you want pie chart, then we will draw separate for Pakistan, US and Sweden. Now this is a typical bar chart. What is the characteristics of the bar chart? It consists of horizontal or vertical bars with a space between bars, ideal for nominal or ordinal scales. Avoid numbers at top or end of bars and avoid scale breaks. See here, we have not written any numbers on the top. Okay. This is also one of the methods of presenting through a bar. So title we will mention here, vertical axis, horizontal x-axis and y-axis. Like if you see here, number of sick people after treatment, this is the kind of bar. This is the bar chart with scale break. You can see here the scale breaks. This is also another example. Now this is your line graph. Arithmetic scale line graphs show amount of change or difference in the dependent variable for the different points of the independent variable. Interval or ratio data. For interval or ratio data, we use arithmetic scale line graphs. See here, this is the dependent variable. This is independent. Here the scale break is permitted. And then you draw, see here, this is the arithmetic scale line graph. Male and female. Secular trends in how many people don't smoke among the adolescent boys and girls. This is the trend throughout the years. So this is a line graph. Then there can be semi-logarithmic or ratio scale line graphs. Show rate of change in the dependent variable for different points of the independent variable. This is also again used for interval or ratio data. More or less similar, but it is usually done on the log values. That is the difference. Here the separation, the gap is equal, but in log scale line graph, the gap is not equal because they are actually the log values. This is the difference. You can see here a line graph is drawn with a bar chart. This is a bar chart 0 to 15. We are talking about the income in thousands, and you see here, so line graph is drawn from the midpoint of that bar chart. So midpoints denote the line graph. Then is the geographical chart. Geographical chart means rate maps or spot maps. The two most common type of geographical charts which are used in the public health. Spot map, where each dot represents a specified number of cases, and rate map means geographical areas shaded, patterned or colored according to magnitude of the rate. You can see here, this is the 14-day COVID-19 case notification rate per 1 lakh as of 21st of July 2020. Kind of quite recent. So you can see here, less than 20 you will see in light yellow color. These are the less than 20. Then the blue color, no new cases reported in these regions. So different colors. These are the geographical maps. Now the most important thing is your frequency distribution. Frequency distribution is basically the organization of the data set into contiguous, mutually exclusive intervals so that the number or proportion of the observations falling in each interval is very accurate. For example, I have here taken an example to make you understand. Like age distribution of one of the classes for an in-class version of the course. The class included total number of students, that is n equal to 121 students. With the age distribution, I'll show you in the next slide. If you see here, see age and number. 21 years, there are 6 students. 22, 16, 23, 11. Here we are coming with one interval, but in the end, you see there is 35 plus, and it shows 21. That means there is no end point here. 35 plus. Okay. So ages, this is at 35 plus years with 21 students having this age. This is an interval with indefinite length and it will require some special handling. So now intervals for a frequency distribution, usually use not less than 6 intervals, generally 8 to 15. Use equal width intervals if possible, if feasible and appropriate. Avoid intervals with indefinite length if possible. Select interval width by dividing difference between smallest and largest observation by 10. Take into account the manner measurements were made when setting up intervals. See here, the age distribution like 21, 22. Now we have to convert this into a continuous data. So what we will do, we cannot say 21.5. So what we do, we kept our range of 21 to 23 so that the midpoints become 22. So the intervals would be written as 21 to 23, midpoint would be 22. See here. So 21 to 23, midpoint 22, and what would be the number? Number would be 16 plus 6, that will be 22. But this thing cannot be done for 35 plus because it is an indefinite length interval. But it can be done here. 21 to 23, 23 to 25, where you can see 20 to 25, midpoint 24, 11 plus 9, that is 20. So we get the midpoint, we get the continuous data, and we get the number, that is n, or we call it frequency. And we can also calculate the percentage here, percentage of the frequency. Then we can calculate cumulative frequency. Cumulative means we keep on adding 18 plus 17, then plus 25 becomes 60, 60 plus 9 becomes 69, so it becomes the cumulative frequency. Now, how we should deal with the indefinite interval? Because here we could not do anything about the indefinite interval because it had no range. It had 35 plus. So if this kind of data is there, what we can do is we can find out the student who has the maximum age. Okay. So we made an arbitrary decision here and we thought of having the oldest student of the age 50. So interval begins at 35 and ends at 51. So then it is 16 years and midpoint would be 16 divided by 2. That would be 8. So now it would be, you can see here, we could have all these values. When we made it from 35 to 51, we had 21 students. Then we had the range of 16, midpoint 8. We added 8 to this and the midpoint we obtained was 43. 35 plus 8, 43. Number would remain 21. Okay, percentage 17 and cumulative frequency 100. That was your frequency distribution. Now histogram. Graph of a frequency distribution is called histogram, done for continuous variables. That is why there we divided data as 21 to 23 and we did not go with the data 21, 23, 24. No. Rules: there is no space between bars means continuous. Equal areas must represent equal percentages or numbers. Percentages often preferred to numbers for vertical axis. Histo means cell and this is the histogram. You can see here. The histogram drawn like this. Okay. So midpoints have been drawn here and these are the values. The frequency that we had obtained, if we go back, you can see here 18. This midpoint 22, percentage 18, and this we have drawn in our histogram. Okay, so all the graph has been drawn like this. This is the frequency and these are the midpoints, but there is no gap as such. And dealing with the interval with the indefinite length, that is the last one we had here. See how we will go here. This is the indefinite. We had taken the limit of 35 to 51. So throughout that, we have tried to show this. This is for the indefinite interval. Now, what is frequency polygon? Frequency polygon is drawn again from the histogram bars only by connecting the midpoints of the top of the histogram bars with straight lines in a manner that the area covered by the resulting figures include 100% of the histogram area. So this is the frequency polygon that we have drawn joining all the midpoints of the bars. Here were the bars actually, and these are the midpoints. And this is the indefinite period that is shown. See here. So this is a frequency polygon. Then comes your mathematical presentation. We did two kinds of presentation. One was numerical presentation, another was graphical presentation, and third one is the mathematical presentation. Mathematical presentation means two things: measures of location and measures of dispersion. Measures of location means measures of central tendency and measure of non-central location, that is quartiles and percentiles. And another is your measures of dispersion that we will deal later. Now, what are measures of central tendency? Mid-range, that is the smallest observation plus the largest observation divided by 2. Mode, the value which occurs with the greatest frequency, that is the most common value, is called the mode. Median, the observation which lies in the middle of the ordered observation, is your median. Then what is mean? Mean is sum of all the observations divided by number of observations. So we have various: mean, that is your average; median, that is your middle; mode, that is the most frequently occurring; mid-range, that is the halfway between smallest and the largest. Then there are two other things, that is geometric mean and the harmonic mean. First of all, we come to mean or average. The mean or average is obtained by adding up the values for all the observations and then dividing by the number of observations. If the total number of observations divided by the number, okay, the values, we have to add up the values and the number. Mean is the best measure of central tendency to use, but though there are certain exceptions to it. This is one of the samples. Here I have used C person, and this is the xi. So sigma xi upon fi, that is, I'll show you here. Add this, okay, and then divide by the number of observation. Number of observation are how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So sum of all these divided by 5 is your mean. This is, you can see here. Of course, all of us know mean. I mean, though we are not that mean, but we know what is mean. And there are different methods of calculating mean depending upon the type of data that we have. If we have a continuous data, we have a different method to calculate mean. So I'm not going into those details because those are all formulas, and you can always find out that how we need to calculate mean. There are different methodologies of calculating. Direct method is there, shortcut method is there. For continuous method, you should know how to calculate mean. So there are a lot of methods to calculate the mean. Now let us come to merits and demerits of mean. Merits of mean: it is a mathematical mean. Okay, it is easy to calculate. there's not much difficulty. It is most easiest method to calculate. It is always definite. It establishes a simple relation among the values of data series. What are the demerits? It cannot be determined by a simple visual observation of the data. No, you will have to calculate it. You cannot simply say by observing data, okay, fine, this is the mean. No, it cannot be presented by a chart or graph. You have to calculate it. It is not suitable for qualitative studies. Sometimes it also does not show representation of a series. So there are certain issues with mean. So we have another method that is called median. Now what is median? Median is a middle observation. Okay, when the complete list of observation is sorted in order. When there is odd number of observation, the value of the middle one is the median, and this is the easiest method. But when there is even number of observations, then you need to find out the average of the two middle observations, and that is called the median. Median is a better indication for a center of the group of the numbers if there are some values that are considerably more extreme than the other. Suppose one value is 1, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and suddenly you have one value which is towards 50, 49. Then you have one value towards 100, that is 98. So we have more extreme values. Okay, so median income is often used for this reason. So here you can see this is an odd number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, odd number. So the middle value is the median. But what is mean? Mean is sum of this divided by number of observations. Now what are merits of median? Simplicity. It is a very simple measure of the central tendency. Okay. Just a glance at the data, especially if it is the odd number, you can easily locate the median value, which is contrary to the mean. It is free from the effect of extreme values. Mean usually get affected if we have extreme values, but median doesn't get affected. Now there is certainty. Certainty means that there is always a specific value in the series, which is median value. It is a real value, better representative value of the series compared to the mean, value of which may not exist in the series. What does it mean? It means if in the last, see here, 20 is the mean, but 20 never existed in the series of the data. But 3 is the median which is present in the data. Then graphic representation, the median value can be estimated also through the graph. It is possible even when data is incomplete. It can always be calculated. The middle item of the series can be found. Demerits, lack of representative character. Median has limited representation characteristics. Unrealistic, it is located somewhere between two middle values. So it is always an approximate measure and not a precise value. Then lack of algebraic treatment. Arithmetic mean is capable of further algebraic treatment, but median is not. For example, multiplying the median with the number of items in series will not give us the sum total of the values of the series, unlike mean. Okay. Now what is mid-range? Mid-range is basically the value of the point halfway between the smallest and the largest observation. It is easily calculated by calculating the average of the value of the smallest and the largest. See here, this is the mid-range. So 18 is the highest number, sorry, the smallest, 22 the highest, divided by plus 18 plus 22 divided by 2 is your mid-range. Now what is mode? Mode is the value of observation that occurs most frequently. It represents a number that does occur in the observation. It's not always well defined, since there may not be one value that occurs most frequently. Mode here is 20. No, see here, mean is 20, but there is no value which is repeated, so there is no mode. Similarly here, there is no mode because none of the number is getting repeated frequently. Now what are the merits? It is simple, popular, less effect of marginal values. It is usually determined only by the value with the highest frequency, the highest occurring number. Graphical representation can be done with the help of histogram. It is best representative as compared to all. There is no need of knowing all the items or frequencies while you are calculating mode. Demerits, it's vague, uncertain. Further algebraic treatment cannot be done. Sometimes it becomes difficult to identify the modal value. Complex procedure of grouping the data might lead to difficulty in calculating the modal value. It ignores the marginal frequencies, which was not being done by the median or mean. Okay. Then there are two other things, which is called geometric mean and harmonic mean. Geometric mean, basically here we what we do is we calculate with the help of the log value. Okay, so we calculate the mean for the log values, and then we convert mean of the log values back to the original scale. That is called the geometric mean. So what is the difference? Difference here is only that here we are using the log values and not the normal values. Though it is quite difficult, geometric mean is quite difficult to understand. So that is why its application is quite restricted. Okay. Then next is your harmonic. This is the geometric mean. Okay. Then comes your harmonic mean. Harmonic mean is basically based on the reciprocal of the numbers averaged. It is defined as the reciprocal of the arithmetic mean. Okay, reciprocal of the arithmetic mean of the reciprocal of the individual observation. Again, it is quite a complex thing and usually not applied. Okay, so I would suggest that geometric mean and harmonic mean that we usually use less. We usually prefer arithmetic mean, median, and mode. And sometimes if we are not able to understand, then we also use the concept of percentiles and quartiles. Now, what is the relationship between mean, median, and mode? You can see here, if all of them lie in the same plane, same value, if mean is equal to median is equal to mode, then it is called symmetrical distribution. Okay, but if mean, median, and mode lie at different areas, different points, then it is called asymmetrical presentation or skewed. You can see here, median usually lies in the middle, mean here, and mode here. This is going towards the positive side, therefore it is positively skewed frequency distribution. If it would have been going like this, in this direction, then we would have called it as going into negatively skewed frequency distribution. What is the relationship? Mode is equal to 3 median minus 2 mean. This is the relationship between median and mode. Mode is equal to 3 median minus 2 mean. Now, what are the measures of dispersion? Dispersion is the measure of variation of the items, the degree to which numerical data tend to spread out about an average value. Dispersion, that means there is some kind of variation of the items. So what is that degree of spread? How the data is spreading away from the average value is calculated through dispersion. And there are different methods that are used. What are those different methods? First is your, these are different methods of basically studying dispersion. Range, mean deviation, standard deviation, interquartile range, and coefficient of variation. Okay, I would also like to mention here that what is the significance of variation? Why do we need to understand? Why we need to study variation, measures of variation? Because of 4 purposes. First, to determine the validity of an average. Then it serves as the basis for the control of variation. Compare two or more series with regard to their variability. Then to facilitate the use of other statistical measures. So we need to understand and we need to study the amount of variation or the amount of dispersion. If there is, then there have to be certain properties that we must look as of a good measure of variation. What should be the properties of the factor that measure of variation? First, it should be simple to understand. It should be easy to compute. It should be rigidly defined. It should be based on each and every item of distribution. Then we should always be able to treat it further algebraically. It should have sampling stability. It should not be unduly affected by extreme items. Okay, so these are the properties of a good measure of dispersion. Thank you so much. This was all about simple and basic statistics. I have not here described about ranges, mean deviation formulas or standard deviation formulas that can always be studied, and we can always go through the stats and go in detail of these formulas. I have not covered. I have just tried to make you understand it. What does it mean? What does dispersion means? I would rather also like to touch upon one thing, that is your skewness. That what do you mean by skewness? Like here we were dealing with skewness, that is asymmetry. When the series is not symmetrical, it is said to be asymmetric. And this asymmetry is defined by in statistics with the word called skewness. So skewness basically refers to asymmetry or lack of symmetry in the shape of frequency distribution. Measure of skewness tells us about the direction and the effect of skewness. As we studied here, if there is symmetrical skewness, then mean, median, and mode all have the same value. But if we have asymmetrical graph, skewed graph, then we have mode, median, and mean at different areas. So symmetrical means when we have all lying in the same, they are all coinciding with each other. Asymmetrical means called skewed. Asymmetrical means skewed distribution. It can be positively skewed or it can be negatively skewed. Positively skewed means when the value of mean is maximum. You can see here in this positively skewed frequency distribution, value of mean is maximum. In case of negatively skewed, the value of mode becomes maximum. Okay. So there are different, now what is the difference between dispersion and skewness? Like we studied, dispersion means when we are moving away from the average data. So what do you mean by, what is the difference between dispersion and skewness? Dispersion is basically concerned with the amount of variation rather than with its direction. Okay, dispersion means how much we are varying, we are moving away from the average. But in which direction? That is not defined by dispersion. That is defined by skewness. So skewness is basically an important characteristic for defining the precise pattern of distribution. Now there can be various tests of skewness. If we want to see that whether the distribution is skewed or not, there are a lot of tests which are done to find out skewness. First, the value of mean, median, and mode do not coincide. When the data are plotted on the graph, they do not give a normal bell-shaped form. Okay, the sum of the positive deviations from the median is not equal to the sum of the negative deviations. Quartiles are not equidistant. Frequencies are not equally distributed. In case when the skewness is absent, okay, that means in case of symmetrical distribution, the values of mean, median, and mode, they coincide. Data when plotted gives a beautiful bell-shaped curve. Sum of the positive deviations from the median is equal to the sum of the negative deviations. Quartiles are equidistant and frequencies are equally distributed at the points. Okay, so these are the tests of skewness. And we can find out from Carl Pearson's coefficient of skewness, Bowley's coefficient of skewness, Kelly's coefficient of skewness. So these are different methods through which we can measure the skewness. That is, how much is it, in how much and in which direction the graph is moving is called skewness. It is moving away from the average value, that is called skewness. And we have different methods. The most commonly used method is your Carl Pearson's coefficient of skewness, which means mean minus mode upon standard deviation. So that is called your skewness. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.